Olive Oatman, Arizona Territory, 1851. Her sister's body was still warm when they made her kneel. The dirt was wet with blood thick, blackening under the sun. Flies swarmed her lips, her wrists, raw from the rope, trembled against the cold steel of the knife pressed behind her neck. A boot crushed her spine, forcing her down. Somewhere behind her, a man was laughing, somewhere ahead. Her sister's eyes stared blankly into the sky, wide open, as if still trying to scream. The horses had scattered, the wagon was burning, and the only voices left were speaking a language she did not understand low, guttural, ancient, one word repeated again and again. Property. They dragged her by the hair. The rocks tore the skin off her feet. The sky turned red. Or maybe it was her vision. For hours, she was silent, until the first brand touched her thigh, and then she remembered how to pray. But no one came. Not when they cut her dress away. Not when they carved marks into her skin. Not when the fire crackled just inches from her face. Her own name began to fade, burned away by pain, buried beneath a new name she didn't choose. And yet, something was wrong. The man who claimed her kept whispering a name that wasn't hers. The older woman who tended her wounds called her daughter without meeting her eyes. And inside the cave where she slept, there were markings on the wall dates, symbols, bloody handprints that no one dared explain. Someone had been there before, many someones, and none of them ever left. The smoke in her hair, the scars on her back, the silence of the others, it all pointed to one truth. This was no raid. It was a ritual, and now so many years later, we're finally ready to speak what was never meant to be spoken. But the earth still remembers the blood, and it does not forgive. They marched in silence across the arroyo, sand crunching under bare feet. Olive's throat burned not from thirst alone, but from the emptiness of hunger clawing up from her belly. Her lungs sucked dry air. Her sister, Mary Ann, clutched at her hand, frail as a withered leaf, lips split and purple, the sky above, so vast and pitiless. They were orphans, though still breathing. At night, the firelight danced across jagged rocks and the faces of their captors. Olive felt the heat press against her skin, smelled fat burning on the embers, heard the scratch of animals in the dark. She learned that fear narrows the world. There is no tomorrow, only the pulse of now of her body trembling with each footstep, each breath, each echo of butchered voices in her head. She remembers the horse's flank against her back, jolting her forward. That was how the Apache, what she later called them, drove them. Chains unseen, made of shame and terror and the desert sun. She saw her father's silhouette cut open by clubs, heard her mother's quiet gasp before collapse. Two sisters, left hemmed in by silence and the acrid tang of blood. She became only hands and legs. She carried water from the stream, but it burned her throat like poison. She carried wood, and each shard of bark dug into her palms. Mary Ann grew listless. The sun carved grooves into her face. She stopped speaking, her eyes dark wells of memory drained. Olive felt her sister slipping into some place without light. They were pushed through canyons carved by time. The weight of the world, the weight of survival, pressed them down. Olive saw vultures trace their paths. The vultures were patient watchers, circling above, waiting for death to catch up. In the village, Olive woke to drumbeats in the dawn. She blinked at unfamiliar huts. The air held a scent of smoke and cooked root and something like promise. Yet her muscles screamed protest. She forced herself upright, felt every tendon tear. She found Mary Ann beside her, curled in fear. Olive brushed her sister's hair aside, tattooed ink on bare skin marks, foreign, yet hers. A brand of acceptance. And still, Mary Ann could not smile. They were no longer captives, but not yet free. Olive learned language by osmosis. Soft syllables murmured over her head. Lullabies in a tongue she did not understand, but felt in her bones like wind before a storm. Someone offered her bread, warm, dense, and as heavy as guilt. She ate, though her tongue recoiled at the thought that this small kindness was built on ashes of traps and terror. Night fell again, and the firelight revealed different faces, calm, expectant, curious. Olive's chest tightened with envy. She listened to their laughter, low and steady. It sounded like safety. She pressed her fingers into the sand and could feel her old life fray. The ache in each finger was a memory of home and of absence. Mary Ann grew thinner. Olive lay awake, tracing the shape of her sister's cheek in the dark, whispered, "Hang on." But the dawn came, and Mary Ann's whispered goodbye was lost to the empty sky. Olive felt a gap inside her, where her sister's presence used to be. The world tilted. Each midday sun carved her down further. She paced the edge of her mind, chasing fragments of who she was, a child of settlers, a sister, a believer in promises. But those names were echoes behind iron doors. She moved as if underwater slowness her only balm. She learned their ways, how to stir ember, how to braid grass for beds, how to hold grief so it doesn't drown you. She learned the softness of names and that people could hold you, without words. Still, at night, she heard a voice behind the fire, whispering a name that was not hers, a promise, or a threat she could not tell which, and she realized then she was surviving. But survival was not living, and the desert held her bones and her secrets both. The air cooled. She pressed her cheek to the earth, clutched a pebble, let the world tilt and fall, but not yet, before she became their property, before the scars and the silence. Olive Oatman walked into the desert with her family, believing she would come out the other side. Before dawn broke, their world shattered. Olive can still feel the jolt of her father's scream, the snap of club against flesh, and the metal taste of her sister's blood in the chill air. The wagon burned behind them, a torch swallowed by desert dusk. Olive, 14. Mary Ann, 7, torn from everything they knew and dragged into shadows that swelled like living things. They walked not as sisters, but as burdens. Olive could feel Mary Ann pressing against her, her small fingers digging into Olive's wrist. Each step dragged them deeper into the vast gray of arroyos, where vultures watched as if they owned the sky. The earth shook with feet not their own. Their captors' voices were low and guttural, words Olive could not understand and did not want to. They were bound by ropes fraying at the edges, strands digging into pale skin, bringing stars to Olive's eyes. Her fingers, slick with sweat and fear, tapped the rough twine once soft, now unforgiving. Mary Ann stumbled, 1, 2, 3 times. Olive half lifted her, then let go. The silence that followed was heavier than any club. Daylight came and vanished without mercy. Their lips cracked as they gulped the dust, their tongues swallowing cinders. Mary Ann's eyes lost color. From hazel they faded into tombstone gray. Olive pressed her sister's back with one hand. The other held a smooth, cruel rock. That was her world now, broken bodies, broken voices, broken promises. They were forced to forage for food roots torn from the earth, bitter loam filling their mouths, hunger rising like smoke in their chests. Olive remembers the sting of boiling water when they fetched it, sharp enough to name her flesh. At night, the sky seemed too vast, as if the stars themselves looked down and whispered, "Why her?" Their captors did not speak of mercy. They spoke of ownership. Each step carried them further from hope. Olive felt her name slipping, replaced by necessity, endurance. She carried Mary Ann's limp body, clutched her hand like a lifeline. Mary Ann sighed once, in the dark, and then stayed silent. Olive rested her ears on Mary Ann's chest, listened to the slow pull of breath, as if death was holding her in place, waiting. Then came Mojave, a trading caravan. Mojave, women with skin like cooled earth, offering blankets, beads, vegetables, everything familiar, everything but hope. They stood on the edge of the world and the other world. Olive felt a hand, Topeka's hand, take hers. It was gentle, but still strange. Olive blinked in the firelight. Flames reflected in Topeka's eyes. They traded bodies for goods, 2 horses, blankets, white beads. Olive felt the weight of the beads, cold against the palm of her hand. She smelled straw, smoke, and something like safety, just for a moment. The trek to the Mojave village was slow, deliberate, performed under scorching daylight and whispering stars. Olive walked as though dreaming, each grain of sand a memory she could not name. She saw huts rise like faded promises. And then there were rivers, water so clear it was a mirror. She knelt and drank and remembered what thirst was meant to taste like. In the village, she was cleansed of dust and bone. Espanio, the chief's wife, offered blankets, roots, and gruel that filled her from the inside. The warmth it brought was unfamiliar. She remembered hunger. She remembered blood. But tonight, her stomach did not roar, it just settled into the night. Topeka braided her hair, each strand steady, deliberate, a lifeline in the dark. Olive felt fingers on her scalp. The touch carried words she did not know, but could feel. They led her to a shelter carved from wood and reed. She lay on blankets, soft as distant dreams. Mary Ann curled beside her, thinner still, eyes glazed, silent. Olive traced the shape of the hut, the weave of the reeds, the handprint of a child on a wall. She touched the symbols' dots, lines etched there like ancient languages. Firelight flickered across them, bringing stories she could not read. But she felt them in her bones: acceptance, rejection, a world both harsher and oddly gentler than before. In the dawn's gray, Espanio knelt beside Mary Ann, offering gruel from cupped hands. Mary Ann breathed, and Olive clutched at her elbow hard. The child's hollow face met Olive's. Olive wanted to whisper everything: their family, the massacre, the blood. But the words choked her. Instead, she watched as Mary Ann lifted the spoon and settled the gruel in her throat. And then, there was only breath. Mary Ann's grip loosened, her eyes closed. Olive pressed her forehead to Mary Ann's hands and felt the warmth drain from her sister's flesh. The room trembled in silence. When Mary Ann's name left the world, Olive's body kept walking. She planted seeds with trembling hands, sang hymns no one taught her, learned to weave, to cook, to fade into the rhythm of the Mojave. She took their name Och, and their language shaped her like molten glass. But at night, in the hush, she lay awake and traced the emptiness where her sister's hand used to be, and she wondered which death was more final, the one that took Mary Ann, or the one that almost took her name. Olive understood the meaning of silence inside the pottery circle before she could speak the language of her captors. The clay walls held heat and memory. The air smelled of wet earth and straw. The women gathered around the hearth did not ask her name. They offered her water in a gourd. She drank it. Her throat buzzed with relief and dread. A tall man entered bearing firewood. His eyes flickered to her face, steady, curious, then dismissed her and turned away. Olive did not flinch. She sat cross-legged, bare feet pressed into the cool soil. She felt every breath, every prick of danger in the flickering shadows. A woman stepped forward, her hands gentle, embracing. She brushed Olive's hair aside. A clean cloth was pressed to her face, wiping away dust and terror. And then the woman spoke, small syllables, soft and rhythmic. Olive did not understand, but she felt each one as physical weight, a promise, or a trap. Days passed in that rhythm of small actions: water drawn at dawn, fire stoked at dusk, corn ground by hand. Olive helped. She learned to weave grasses into mats, learning each tight pattern as if it might hold her life together. Then the man returned. He laid his hand on her shoulder. Olive looked at his face, cracked sun, high cheekbones, a wrinkle like a faded story beside his eye. He said something. It did not sound like her name, but when he spoke, Olive felt something shift, a crack inside her world, and the other women in the hut pressed closer without touching her, watching. That night, Olive lay on reed mats, the fire embers breathing in low tones, the man her captor. Now something else entered and offered her meat wrapped in leaves. Steam brushed her lips. She could taste the salt, the wildness of the land. She ate. Hunger was not vanquished, but for a moment, she remembered pleasure. But with every bite, she felt her soul fray. She realized she was becoming part of someone else's world. Her body moved on its own accord when he returned to offer her skins to wear. She slipped into the garment, tanned leather, softened by smoke and time. It bit the skin at her shoulders. She kept silent. Days turned to weeks. Her name, Olive, became an echo. Receding, she stood in the smoke-swept doorway, watching the men bring trade goods, weapons, beaded trinkets. Children ran past her, laughing in that language she was beginning to piece together. She knew she was to be counted among them, not as a guest, as kin, as wife. She learned his name not in words, but in the way the elder spoke it once. Reverent. It meant oak in a voice that rumbled like roots. grounding. He did not say it to her directly, but she heard it in the way others stood when he entered the lodge, in the soft ceremonies he commanded. Olive felt fear gnaw her belly. A seed sprouted rebellion. She glanced at the doorway, imagining dirt beneath her fingernails, the smell of pine sap. She imagined running, but her knees sagged, fear bound her legs like vines. Anchoring, in the firelit nights, she waited for his touch, a command or comfort. She could not tell, and one night, it came. His fingers brushed her cheek. The touch was electric, familiar, and foreign, a language outside her own. Her breath caught. She felt tears behind her eyes. She did not cry. She could not. He offered her blankets, fresh bread, a cup of bitter tea. She sipped. The warmth carried meanings she could not name. She felt the tether tighten. She wanted to resist, to scream, but the words lodged in her throat. At dawn she woke alone. He was gone. The hut felt cavernous. She pressed her hands to her belly, empty, but alive with something she could not own. Fear, longing. The weight of expectation pressed into her chest. She stood in the cool light of early sun and felt the heat rise to her cheeks. Over the next days, she assisted with preparing hide, cooking, weaving. She learned their song's soft refrains that spoke of river and roots. She hummed them while twisting grass. One day, as she braided, she felt a life shift inside her, a flutter of awareness. As if something had answered a call she didn't remember making. Olive stared at the braided grass in her hands. A child. The thought was stranger than fear. She looked out at the canyon beyond the hut, crimson rim and arid riverbed. The land that birthed her now pressed against her back. She inhaled its scent, saw the sunlit dust. In that moment, Olive understood that her captivity had shaped more than her body. A new identity was being cracked open within her. Yet, as she stood hands on hips, bracing against the world that claimed her, she felt the tremor of memory. She remembered the sister she carried in her shadow, the girl whose voice haunted the corners of her mind with every song, every refrain in the tongue she did not speak. And Olive realized her body was no longer hers alone. But in the echo of that realization, she claimed a fragment of something more: survival, not as relinquishment, but as evolution. The dawn came again, but it brought no hope. Olive stumbled through the narrow passage of rock, dust coating her lips. The world smelled of ash and sweat. And then she saw her in a clearing, where the sun dared not linger, hung what was once a woman, now only a scalp. The edges curled in the desert air, dark as charred paper. That scalp, her scalp dangling from a wooden post like a grotesque flag. Eyes that once held laughter were gone. Only hair and skull remained, shivering. The silence swallowed her scream before it left her throat. She fell to her knees, sand ground into her palms. She pressed her forehead to the earth, tasting iron and salt and betrayal. She traced the curls with trembling fingers, her hair. Yes, but not hers anymore. The strands had stories, and now those stories were cut loose, floating in an empty sky. They forced her and the others to watch. No explanation, only the slow, cruel dance of vultures above. That scalp was a message, a wordless decree. This is our land. This is our fate. Olive's stomach knotted. Her bones ached from long carries, from nights spent whispering lullabies under firelight. She remembered Mary Ann's soft hum echoing in the dark. Now, that hum was gone. They marched again. Olive walked with her eyes turned inward, unwilling to look at others or herself. Each step pressed bare skin deeper into pain. At night, she counted stars, 1 hand, 2, 3 until dawn pushed her back into motion. She felt hollow. Days passed. They arrived at a camp carved into a stone-fingered canyon. The women were made to kneel. Around them, warriors circled, faces lit by torches. Olive remembered Mary Ann's laughter as she brushed a broken twig aside. Now that sound was buried under earth. A warrior older, scarred, stepped forward. His knife glinted. Olive's heart thudded. He approached Mary Ann's empty place. He cut. A blade carved lines beneath her jaw, symbols she could not name. A marking of ownership. A silence made visible. He did not skin her, but he marked her, and that mark burned into flesh, stole her more completely than any removal of skin. Olive gasped when he touched her chin. Pressing a finger into the brand, it burned, a searing reminder that even her silence could be shaped. The night fell heavy. Firelight flashed across new markings on the other women. Blood welled in Olive's mouth, but she held it back. In that hush, the warrior leaned close. His breath smelled of smoke and leather. He whispered in a language she almost understood. A question, a command, she could not tell. The word hovered inside her ribs, half-formed. Something twisted inside her, tighter than fear. Fear had given way to something else, emptiness, or resolve. She flexed her jaw. She would not look at the brand in a mirror. She would bear it. They moved again, on the trail. Olive carried Marianne's locket she had pried from her sister's neck when death came. It felt cold and foreign, a reminder that only she remained, only she could carry the memory. The brand throbbed with every step, a silent hum beneath her skin. She forced herself to recall Marianne's small hand, the way she hummed lullabies in the dark. She let the memory fill the space beneath the brand. The scar could not erase that. They crossed a river at dawn. Olive knelt and pressed her fingers into the current. She whispered Marianne's name. The water washed her tears. It did not heal, but it spoke of movement, of flowing away from pain, of change, however slight. They camped on the far bank, at night. Olive nestled beneath a blanket of stars, pressed the locket to her heart. The brand ached, a constant thrum against her skin, but within her chest, her sister's memory glowed. Silence roared around her. The brand did not forgive. The land did not forgive. But she still breathed. She still carried Marianne. And one day, if the sky did not collapse, she would speak her name. The dawn came with a brittle calm, as if the world itself held its breath. In the half-light, Olive sensed movement, the snap of bowstrings, the low click of wooden sandals. She pressed her palm to her cheek, feeling bruises that burned beneath thin skin. She had stopped counting. Pain was rhythm now, as steady as heartbeat. A warrior circled her. He carried a slender rod like broken reed, but heavier, meaner. His gaze drifted from her bruised jaw to the dull gleam of her eyes. With a single, fluid swing, the rod cracked her shoulder. The crack echoed through her bones, and she tasted copper. Her breath knocked against her ribs, moaning out into the cold. She tasted fear and something darker, shame, the shame of being owned. Each blow peeled away a piece of defiance, layer by layer, until there was only the tremor left in her knees. She pressed her hands to the ground to stop them from shaking. They stabbed with old echoes of her father's voice, her mother's lullaby, Marianne's soft hum just before, and now those echoes were bleeding out. They made her stand then, at the edge of the firelight. The embers crackled, painting faces with orange flicker. She could see others women, girls lined behind her. Each bore her own story, etched in bruises and scars. Yet alongside her, invisible, yet present, lay something unbroken memory. She remembered the time she and Marianne pressed daisies between the pages of a torn Bible at home. She remembered the feel of her mother's fingers on her hair, the lullaby humming her to sleep. Those memories were quiet now, but they were not gone. A warrior brought forth a crude belt made of braided sinew. He wrapped it tight across Olive's back and snapped it. A note of agony shot through her spine, stuttering in her breath. The belt cut deep, the edges carved lines that flamed with white pain. She did not cry. Tears ran silent, sticky paths down her face. The fire glowed like a distant sun. The warriors watched. The villagers watched. Fear pulsed like dust in the air. Olive thought, "This is not punishment. This is your teaching, a demonstration of ownership, of control." They untied her then, but did not release her. Her shoulders sagged, and she stood there, body trembling, heart hammering against ribs that felt hollow. She spoke nothing. That night, sleep found her unwilling, and when it did, it came in fragments. She saw her father's dead eyes. Marianne's body curled in shadows, the broken lullaby hanging between worlds. She woke with her chest tight, breath snatched, palms slick with sweat. She stumbled into the morning, arms raw. Someone handed her water cool, muddy, trembling. She drank without tasting. She stared across the camp, behind tents, behind torches. behind the women moving like shadows. She saw a reflection not in a mirror, but in the shape of herself when she was free. She learned then that violence does not end because the body forgets. It stays in the hum of muscle, in the flinch of breath, in the ache behind closed eyes. She carried the stick's echo in her shoulder, a drum that reminded her you are still here. Each breath was resistance. Days passed. She woke to fear and lived through pain. She found solace in routine, holding the bucket of water, mending cloth, guiding Mary Ann's ghost across dreams. She breathed through motions until the pain receded enough for memories to whisper through the scar tissue. She began to hum again quietly at first, lyrics half-remembered lullabies, hymns, fragments of her girlhood home, notes tangled with nightmares, forming threads of defiance. A warrior passing by paused. He did not touch her. He merely listened. That was how she knew escape could begin, not with strength, but with small refusals inside. At night, she pressed her fingers into the scar on her shoulder. The skin was tight, puckered. Beneath it ran the map of all the blows she had endured. She listened to it, as if it spoke, survive, and she would. In the hush before dawn, Olive stepped beyond the firelight. The desert wind caught her hair. She felt the weight of her body, bruised but upright. She let the wind press into the scar, erasing the memory with cold touch. She closed her eyes and named Mary Ann soft, full, alive in the silence. And for the first time since she was taken, she felt something name her back. Night fell like a curtain of ash, so heavy Olive could feel it settle against her skin, across the fire's glow. Women moved like ghosts, arms hollowed, backs bowed. Olive's muscles trembled with every breath, but something fiercer stirred in her chest. They led her to the center of the circle, where embers clung to the air, flames crackled, casting long shadows that flickered across hardened faces. She was unwrapped from blanket skin exposed, raw from bruises and branding. A red-hot poker hovered near her ankle, the hiss of metal ready to bite. She swallowed fear like bitter water. One spark, one careless motion, and the pain would radiate through her bones, but the man held it steady. Pressure, not fire. He pressed the hot metal to her flesh, not to scar, but to tether her. Olive's breath stuttered as the heat raced beneath her skin. Then he pressed again. The heat spread. Her ankle burned with a white-hot core, a tether anchoring her to silence. As the poker cooled, he replaced it with his hand, warm, almost gentle. Then he whispered, "Our blood calls to blood." The words slithered into her mind, as if offering a currency she did not know she held. They left her there, kneeling, the fire circling her like a predator. Ash drifted onto her hair. She curled her fingers into the dirt, tasting grit. Memories rose like smoke. Mary Ann's lullaby, the taste of spring water, her mother's hand at dawn. The terror had shaped her. But memory was the ember that refused to die. They sparked torches then. Women marched in front of her, forced to dance amid flickering light. Each step was a confession, each movement a fracture in their will. Olive watched their faces, eyes removed of mercy, jaw set in obedience. Yet she saw ghosts in their eyes, shadows of who they were before. A girl near the fire collapsed. She caught her breath and tried to stand, but fell again. Olive slid forward, caught her by the arm. In the moment, their eyes locked. Olive felt something tremble inside her. Hope, shame, defiance tangled as the night sky. But Olive remained kneeling. She let the dance burn into her memory while the brand pulsed on her ankle. She felt her flesh tighten, alive with pain and memory. The fire roared and the air vibrated with echo. Then they stopped. Silence moved like a hand across the camp. The dancers froze. Olive's ankle throbbed. Her heart thundered. She rose slowly, disbelief and resolve rising like heat. She stepped toward the girl. Torchlight caught her cheek, dancing across tears she did not shame. She touched the girl's hair, soft as regret. A breath passed between them. The girl nodded recognition without words. Olive took her hand. The brand pulsed. Fear slammed into her chest, but memory, Mary Ann's hum. A mother's lullaby pressed louder. She pulled the girl toward darkness beyond the firelight. No one stopped her. They fled across dark dunes. Sand slipped through their fingers. Olive trembled, fear and courage warring beneath her ribs. The girl leaned into her small, terrified, breathing. Olive closed her eyes and saw Mary Ann's face pale but defiant, and with that echo, she found the word she thought she lost home. The desert swallowed their tracks. Flames behind them marked their passing a broken ritual. Olive squeezed the girl's hand. The brand on her ankle flared a reminder that trauma does not vanish, does not forgive. But she was still whole. In the cold dawn, she pressed a kiss to the girl's forehead, whispering lullabies she'd learned, notes drifting over sand and memory. They walked away from fire, from shame, into the quiet promise of what might still bloom. Years later, when Olive Oatman was finally returned to white society, she stood in a silk dress before polished mirrors, her face scrubbed, her hair combed, her posture rehearsed. Yet across her chin, 2 thick lines of blue ink still marked her a tribal tattoo etched into her skin, and deeper still into her silence. They asked her questions, so many questions. What had they done to you? Did they make you forget? Were you ever truly one of them? She answered with polite hesitation, smiled, even when her hands trembled, told the stories they wanted of capture, of pain, of survival. But there were stories she never told. Like how, some nights, she still woke with sand in her mouth. Or how her body flinched when firewood cracked too loud. Or how the wind sometimes carried voices in a language no one else heard, voices that did not beg, did not command, only whispered, "Stay." She wore gloves, long ones, to hide the scars on her wrists. She avoided still water, couldn't bear to see her reflection looking back with eyes that had once been her sister's. In the town where they kept her after her rescue, they built her a room. The walls were white, the bed was soft, the doors locked from the inside. She walked the perimeter each morning, tracing her fingers along smooth, painted walls, feeling for something that had never been finished. One day, a servant found her standing barefoot in the center of the room, staring at the floor. When asked what she was looking at, she only whispered, "There's still ash in the cracks." No one understood what she meant, but each night, when the house fell silent, they swore they heard something stir. Not footsteps, not wind, but something softer, like the hush of a song no one remembers learning. A lullaby, unfinished. And somewhere far out in the desert, where no one dares walk after dusk, a single handprint remains on the wall of a ruined shelter. Small, faded, but still warm.